Hi, I'm Paul Leonard-Morgan, and you're listening to the Sound Architect Podcast.
Hello, and welcome to the Sound Architect Podcast. I am your host, Sam Hughes, and as you just heard, today I'm joined by composer Paul Leonard-Morgan. Thanks for joining me today, Paul. How are you?
I'm fine. First coffee of the morning here in LA. It's a beautiful sunny day.
Excellent. Just what you need to start your day, eh?
Yeah, I think that the last one was at 4 o'clock this morning, so I got a few hours sleep in between times.
Oof, that is brutal. So before we discuss your recent projects, which I really want to talk about, I'm really curious how you began your journey into music composition.
My mum's a music teacher, and I remember having the most awful Casio keyboard when I was about 11 years old. She's a brilliant pianist and flautist, but I just started playing some stuff on the keyboards, and as you do when you have a very supportive school, I think they let me take that Casio keyboard into a school concert, and I played some awful music, and you've got the parents there politely clapping at the end going, this was the worst thing I've ever heard. But I just always liked writing music and writing tunes and stuff like that, and I'd sit on the piano and play, and I think then when I got into... I didn't quite know what I wanted to do, to go to college. And someone said, well, you should go look at the Guildhall and go and look at the Royal Scottish Academy of Music. And they were both doing these film music courses. Like, ooh, film music. That sounds like fun. I like film and I love music, and let's see how it goes. And I think for me, the fun part is always just writing music for different formats. I do film, I work with big bands, I do theatre, I do games. It doesn't really matter what the medium is. I just love writing music. Well, yeah, and I think that's what matters as well. The passion really carries it forward. Yeah, you've got to, and I was speaking to someone about that the other day, he's a composer. So, well, how do you get into it? I was like, well, that I can't tell you, but what I can tell you is that you've just got to totally love what it is that you do. If it starts being a job, you're in the wrong kind of thing, You're writing music because it's music rather than you're writing music because it's for someone else.
Yeah, definitely. But have you ever felt in that position where, because with creativity, people always talk about trying to force it or trying to kind of organize it. Have you ever been like on a tight deadline or really short amount of days to work and you're worrying about how to fit it all in?
It's twofold actually, because I write really quickly. If you have too much going on, there was a time, I think it was about 2 years ago, and I was working on Warhammer, like Dawn of War for the guys at Relic. I was working on that. I think I was working on this TV series. I think it was Limitless. And I had a couple of films on as well. And it was literally a case of trying to compartmentalize. It was like, right, Monday's going to be Warhammer. Tuesday's going to be the first big pass for Limitless. 3 is going to be day one of the film and so on. And I was pretty fried by the end of it. It's just trying to keep your brain in focus.
Yeah.
Whereas, as you know, there's no real rhyme or reason as to where creativity comes from, but you've got to start getting in that zone and get the adrenaline going. And recently with the lockdown, I've got a lot going on at the moment, and I've definitely struggled because the deadlines don't seem real. They say, right, we need to hear this passed by next Friday. And you're like, yeah, but there's no theatre release date for this anymore. So do you really mean Friday? Is the world going to end if it's not next Friday? And I think that, but genuinely, mentally as a composer, that's quite a hard thing, because I like having deadlines to go, right, okay, I'm really going to get into the film this week to get my first pass done over to the director. Whereas if it suddenly doesn't feel quite as urgent, it's quite dangerous, because then my brain just switches off a little bit.
Yeah, I can imagine. And how has it been in the current coronavirus times for you?
Well, where I am, I built a studio a couple of years ago. It's a kind of 1,500 square foot guest house at the back of the main house.
Nice.
And it's been the best thing I ever could have done. So in normal times, you can record up to about 20, 25 strings up here. There's a Yamaha concert grand, my assistant's in that room and so on. Whereas obviously since coronavirus, there's no one in that room. My writing room is just next to it. And I think, so where we are, we're kind of on the outskirts of LA, and it's kind of tucked away. So nothing's really changed in the sense that I just keep on walking over to the studio, get the kids up, and they've been homeschooling. They're on holiday now, but I get the kids up and then I just come into the studio. I write all day, go back and have dinner with them, come back in the studio, I'm writing all night. So nothing's changed like that. I think the things that have changed are spotting sessions where you used to go to them in person, where you go through the music with the director
of course,
and work out where it's coming in. They don't happen. So, or if they have been, then it's obviously been over Skype or Zoom or other apps are available. But so that's the only thing that's really changed. And I do miss the human contact. You suddenly realize it was like, oh, that was my one day out a week to go spotting.
Yeah.
Which is why you suddenly get me on the podcast. He's like, oh my God, he won't shut up. He hasn't spoken to anyone for how long?
He's been locked up in his studio for weeks, months, and just suddenly just lets loose on the mic.
Actually, do you know what? On a random aside, the Zoom has come out of nowhere. And I was saying to someone the other day, it's like the poor guy at Skype who's suddenly going, but hang on, we've been around for ages. Why are they using us?
We've done this forever. Yeah, well, they snuck up on Skype, really. I think they were being used in businesses, and then all of a sudden this happened, and everyone was like, Zoom? Yeah, okay.
I know, someone in their marketing department's getting absolutely hammered by their boss at the moment.
Yeah. So, I do want to get into talking about Tales from the Loop. Now, you worked with Philip Glass on this one, right? How did that collaboration work in terms of who did what?
Do you know, I'd never collaborated with a composer before last year, and then suddenly I had Cyberpunk with Marcin and Piotr, and then Philip on Tales from the Loop, two very different things. But Tales from the Loop was like suddenly, okay, well, how does one collaborate as a composer? You know, you collaborate with musicians all the time.
Yeah.
You get them to play in a certain style, or you get them to do a certain thing. Whereas as a composer, I think the first thing I was thinking was like, well, I just don't want to be stepping on his toes if I suggest something and it's completely wrong. Is he going to take offense at that if I say something about his chords? And I learned very quickly that he is not that sort of person at all. He's just the most wonderful human being, totally open to ideas. And not just in music, but in life in general. He's always searching for kind of answers to things. And so I flew over last March and had a coffee with him in his house in New York. And it was very, very surreal, but we just got chatting about life in general. And I think it's almost like a first date, isn't it? It's like, okay, so tell me about yourself. Well, I'm Philip Glass. Tell me about yourself. But yeah, and then we just got chatting about musical styles and musical content and how it might work. And then we went upstairs to his piano and just started writing some music to the visuals. But I think, as anything, it takes a while to get to trust each other, particularly if you don't know the person straight out.
Yeah.
So went off and we started writing some themes, as I say, to kind of the visuals. And then I came back to LA. And then about 2 weeks later, he sent me over a bunch of manuscript of his ideas. And I had a look at them and I said, well, yeah, that's really nice. But how about if we took that and developed it and I added a tune over the top, very tentatively thinking, I really hope this is okay. And he goes, I love that theme. And if I take that theme, I could do this with it. And then he changes the chords underneath to make it a lot more interesting. And suddenly, yeah, it really was like that. It was an organic process where we just started bouncing ideas off each other.
That's awesome, because I was always curious about that, because when you see a lot of composers collaborating more these days, especially the last few years, and more often than not in video games. So I always wondered how they delegated the tasks. But in linear medium, like Tales from the Loop, I was extra curious, because with games, you can at least sort of go, okay, you get ambiences or you get levels, or you can sort of branch it out into things.
Yeah, and you'd said that, how you're involved in the video game industry. And I think that is very much the difference, it seems to me anyway. It's like in video games, you can go, right, you take care of all the menu music, or you take care of all this, or you're going to do the battle music or whatever. Whereas if you have that on a soundtrack for a film, it's very hard to have a cohesive soundtrack if you just do that, because you're going to have one cue battling up to the next one, which is, nudging up to the next one. And so it might be one composer who's done one cue and then another composer's done another one. And you see that in a lot of TV stuff, and it absolutely kills me going like, they're so obviously using 3 or 4 composers on this, and that person's done the love theme, and that person's done the chase theme, and that person's done that. And it's not that it's bad, but it just doesn't meld at all. And I think for me, certainly why I got into writing film music was because you want to help that emotion and you don't want to detract from it. You want to really help it. And I think one of the really lovely things that a lot of people have said about the Tales from the Loop score has been, we've got no real idea where Philip stopped and you started, or where you stopped and Philip started. It's this wonderful work, he says arrogantly, but it's this work that lots of people listen to, and it's just a lovely listen to. You're not starting to analyze going, well, that sounds completely different to that cue or that cue. It's just this, again, I use that phrase again, organic process, how the music's just gradually evolved through the different episodes.
Awesome. And were you given briefs for each episode, or were you given a brief overall for the series on what kind of aesthetics you were going for?
So we get the brief was, again, use of language coming from the UK to the US. So Mark Marnek, this wonderful director of Never Let Me Go, 1 Hour Photo, he's just brilliant and total visionary. And he said to me, well, I definitely picture it as an analog score. So I was like,
okay.
Well, okay. So I've got all my synths out from, various projects and so on. I didn't realize, look, I'm thinking, well, how's this going to work with me and Philip? Is Philip going to write some piano stuff and then I'm going to add a load of synths? So I didn't realize that what he meant analog was not digital.
Yeah.
So, so I'm like, oh, right now I see what you're talking about. So the brief was that was pretty much it. Just analog. So again, when Philip and I got discussing the kind of sounds, Philip's got such a unique sound anyway. It's like often imitated, never nailed.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is about him. He just sits there and somehow it's where he takes his chords. Anybody can play triplets to a degree, but where he takes his chords is just so unique. It's just beautiful. And it's the simplicity of it that really brings out the emotions. And so when we started composing away, and episode 1 was a full-on orchestra we recorded in Nashville. I think it was a 50 or a 60 piece.
Oh, wow. Nice.
And it suited it. Great. Kudos to Fox and Disney for backing us up. We kind of said, well, we can't really do what you want with what you're saying that we have. And they're like, well, just tell us what you need and we'll sort it. So we said, all right, well, we need a big F-off orchestra. Okay, done.
Oh, wow,
so
cool.
Again, all of this stuff for Tales on Loop, it just doesn't happen in real life. It's like, here, have a cello, or here, have a quartet. But to be given a full-on orchestra for one episode. So we went out there, went out to Nashville, did episode 1, and we suddenly realised that episode 2, this is just answering your question about the sounds, realised that it doesn't need that massive orchestra. Every single episode of Tales from the Loop, it's sort of an anthology. Nathaniel, the showrunner, will kill me for saying that. It's like, it all needs to be watched together. But I'm just like, yeah, but they do work individually. Some characters reappear once or twice in different episodes. But it's not about it's not a big overriding story arc. It's about 8 individual tales that happen in this town where strange things happen underground. Yeah. At this place called The Loop. So we're like, well, episode 2 is just this really intimate story. So let's just cut it all back. Don't need the big orchestra. And we just cut it down to a quartet. And suddenly you've got a completely different emotional context with the music. And then episode 3 and 4, it's like, okay, the quartet was working episode 2. How about we add a flute and a harp? And to the piano, obviously there's piano in it all. And then it just, that kind of became it. I think episode 3 and 4, we kind of had, okay, well, this is the overall colour of it. It's a quartet plus a harp plus a flute plus the piano. And that's pretty much nailed the sound of it. And then obviously how you treat the instruments, you can do it in different ways. You can have them playing harmonics. You can have them playing richly and beautifully with vibrato. But that was fundamentally how we actually came up with the colours for the show.
Awesome. So in the same way that the series has an individual story in each episode, it has an individual soundtrack in a way.
Absolutely. And I mean, without going into too much detail, I mean, episode 4, which Andrew Stanton directed, who did Wall-E, which is, bizarrely enough, I was watching that this weekend with the kids. But there's something about the fact that he's a Pixar director, that episode 4 doesn't have that much dialogue. A lot of Tales on the Loop doesn't have that much dialogue. It's quite a slow burner. So it's all to do with the visuals, and Mark's glorious visuals in episode 1, Andrew's in episode 4. There was a thing where I said to Nathaniel, the showrunner, I was like, we can't mock this up. You know how you kind of do mock-ups to make it sound like, this is how it'll be, and you put it on your best samples and whatever else. Yeah. But I said to him, I can't do it for this because the sound that's in my head, Philip's been talking about this Egyptian ney. I've been talking about using a violin in a very folky way. And when I say that, it's literally a violin one, very high up, playing it very raw as if you're a folk fiddler, but also with harmonics. And I said, I just can't do that on samples. So he said, well, how do I know what it sounds like? I said, well, you just got to trust us.
Nice.
and again, fair play to them. I mean, this all just, it's like a magical composer story. It just doesn't happen. He was like, okay. So we went in and recorded episode 4, and he really had no idea how the hell it was going to sound. And fortunately, it went really well. And just that moment of playing off the violin, we had the violin player come into the control booth at Capitol Studios, and we're starting saying, okay, try it like this. And Nathaniel and everyone in the back are just going, this is amazing. You're suddenly seeing music at work in front of their eyes. I'm rescoring it at the desk, writing it all out on manuscript paper, and then she's trying it out. But so that was episode 4. Episode 7 was kind of a slightly horror kind of version. So I ended up taking some of the tunes which we'd had in 5, and Philip had this lovely thing in episode 6, and I detuned it. So although we never actually used any synthesizers in the score at all, there is digital manipulation of some stuff because I was then detuning it so much that it then sounds like these really low basses kind of going, wow, wow, which then becomes a motif. And I think that was a lovely, lovely song for 8:30 in the morning. But I think, all of those things, the idea again with it was wanted tons of melodies. Nathaniel had always said he wanted it to be a score. I guess your question about the brief was, his one brief was, I want it to be a score which people listen to out with the series. I want it to be full of melody and I just want it to be a really nice listen.
Cool.
So that was the kind of one part of it. The other part was I wanted to use motifs. And I was saying, when Philip had said about the Egyptian nail, I was like, well, we could do that on recorder. We could do that on a lithophone, just interesting instruments, which didn't need huge melodies, but when you had this tiny little motifs, it's like Pavlov's bell. You suddenly become aware that something is about to happen. So that was really it. It was kind of different motifs and different kind of tunes for each episode, but there's an overriding feel and an overriding tune that keeps coming back whenever something is happening in the loop.
Okay, cool. That's awesome. I like how you kind of precede action or, an event in the series with a musical cue to kind of like teach the viewer that's going to kind of like precede something. Yeah,
it's like a subliminal thing, I guess, because I hate music which points things out. I don't want people to suddenly feel, now you must be feeling emotion. Now you must be feeling sad. But I like it when it suddenly comes under and you're not really aware of why you're feeling the way you are, but it just makes you feel that way. And someone had said that about the score, actually. There's a guy in Milan. I mean, it's been a crazy reaction to the score, but it's like so many people have listened to it during lockdown and they said it's really helped them get over, it sounds ridiculous to say it, but they've said that it's really helped them get through these last 3 months because they find it a very relaxing soundtrack to listen to. And there was someone in Milan that said, I haven't seen my gran for however long. I don't know. I think it was Milan where it was horrendously hit in Italy.
Yeah, it was really bad.
Yeah. And he said him and his friends just keep on sending each other tracks from Tales from the Loop. And then Amazon have released it as a visualizer, which had, I think it was like 1.5 million hits in the first week or something.
Oh, damn.
And it's brilliant. And loads of people hadn't seen the series. They just heard this wonderful music and they said, oh, well, again, I keep saying wonderful. It's just because that's what they say. It's not what I say. But as a composer, to have that reaction from the public where there's something calming about it, but you don't know why it's calming. Because one person's kind of happy might be another person's melancholic. Different people react different ways to things. But I think when music makes you feel a certain way, it's a lovely thing.
Yeah, it's great. And when you can get that kind of synergy between the music and the viewer as well, it's really nice to have that they can interpret it their own way.
Oh my God, yeah. We had lots of people are doing dances to the music. It's clearly lockdown craziness. But they've been dancing to either the soundtrack or dancing to covers of the soundtrack. We've had I think we're up to 1,050 now, covers of it that people just send.
That's insane.
It's mental. And again, it's so nice. And Philip and I were discussing this the other day. It's like, well, what is it that has made people react to it in this way? Because again, this is our first time talking. I'm not arrogant like that, but it's like, there's got to be something about it. And whilst this soundtrack is so special to us, that there's got to be something that makes the public react to that. And I wonder if it's the simplicity of the piano music, the fact that it is full of melodies, which you don't get in a lot of soundtracks these days.
Yeah.
I don't know, there's something about it. But yeah, so say 1,050 covers of people. There was an accordion player that played it in a really great sort of Danny Elfman, Tim Burton sort of vibe. There was someone else played it on, I think, did a hardcore thrash drum version. Someone else has done a dance remix of it. All these different people are taking it their own way, which is so cool. But then, so the dancers have started doing 3-minute dances in their houses based on the music, obviously based on the covers, which is based on obviously our soundtrack, which is based on the film, which is based on the artwork of Simon Stalenhag. So it's like artwork at work.
Wow. That is just like so many steps.
But it's bonkers, isn't it? And all of this is based on the artwork of Simon Stalenhag. The scripts were based on these pictures, which I've never heard of happening before.
Yeah, the fact that those artworks inspired so much and all of this, and it's come to this now, there's dance covers of the inspiration.
I know, it's like, no, we're not making Stranger Things. We could have done that if I'd taken Mark's brief literally and done it on my analog synths, but fortunately we didn't.
Speaking of that, actually, like how did you first get hired for it? Did they come to you? Did you have to pitch for it? Or
no, I think they've run out of ideas. Mark was very keen on using Philip. I think he's wanted for a long time to get a project where they could do something together.
Right.
Just is a great admirer, as am I, and as most people, of Philip's music. Philip is I think he's 83, but like one of the busiest composers alive. He's doing 3 or 4. Well, how would you be busy if you weren't alive? That's a strange thing to say, but I think he's got 3 or 4 operas on the boil at the moment. He's never done a TV series, was his other thing.
Wow.
Like, look, I'm incredibly busy. I don't really know what I would be doing if I did a TV series. And then the guys at Fox and Disney had said, well, look, there's this other guy, Paul Leonard-Morgan, he's worked with Errol Morris a lot. And Errol Morris, who's Oscar-winning director, had used Philip for, I don't know, however many films, 4 or 5. And then he had Danny Elfman do one. And then I've done Errol's last 4 films, I think. I'm just about to start my 5th one with him. So they said, well, look,
nice.
they've got very similar sensibilities in some ways. And then Mark said, oh, hang on, is that the guy that did Wormwood, which was a series I'd done with Errol for Netflix? And I said, yes. He said, oh my God, I love that score. It's absolutely perfect. Yes, I'd love to meet. And I think that was it. I think there was the thinking of, well, look, if Errol Morris has used Philip, and their partnership has gone on for however long, and now Errol's using Paul as well because, say, Philip's incredibly busy, then there's got to be something there. So they literally, I think they just thought, well, let's chuck them in a room. What's the worst that can happen? But I really do think that's how it came about. I don't know. I've never actually asked them the question, but that's my theory. And I think then it's a case of, well, look, you have people with different sensibilities. And Errol had always said that as well. He said, yeah, you've got a touch of the Philip Glass, but you've also got a kind of wackiness with your kind of Limitless soundtracks and your weird electronica, which takes it a different direction. Because, there's nothing worse than sort of just going, oh, I'm going to sound like today, or I'm going to sound like, you've got to have your own style. There's no point trying to imitate other people.
Yeah, of course.
So yeah, that was it. And then the two of us just got composing away and fortunately got on each other's wavelength very quickly.
Yeah, well, it's kind of it's really nice when you can work with someone that you can bounce off, right? Because as opposed to just delivering stems or delivering work over the wall, you actually get to have a conversation.
Yeah, and I think what was wonderful about this is, yes, it was a collaboration between Philip and myself, but it was also a collaboration between Mark in episode 1, and it was also a full-on collaboration with Nathaniel, the showrunner. I mean, Nathaniel, who wrote all 8 episodes, was on set for all 8 episodes, which again doesn't happen. He knew every single part of this score inside out, and there was a scene where it was in episode 3. And again, it doesn't really matter what's happening. But the point is, Nathaniel asked us to go away and write some stuff. And we went back and said, well, how about this? So that's beautiful, but there's too much going on. When the double bass comes in, it sticks out. And I was like, Nathaniel, there's 3 instruments in this thing. There's a violin, a cello, and a double bass. You're now telling me that I've only got 2 instruments left? And he was totally right at that moment. He was like, yeah, by getting rid of this, suddenly it's just underscoring. And then when the double bass does come in later on, it suddenly carries through. But so his reactions were so helpful as a collaborator to that, because the whole point of collaborations for me is it takes you down a different route to one that you would do by yourself.
Of course, yeah.
So it's like, well, that takes you in a different direction. And at the end of it, I'm not joking, at the end of these 8 episodes, it was in the last recording session at Capital, I just burst into tears. And I don't know why. It sounds weird. The cello was playing over the last cue, and it was beautiful, beautiful, beautiful track that he had played. And yeah, I think it was that whole emotion where everyone's been so supportive. It was like this small family, which again, when you're on crazy films, it's you have a lot of people with a lot of input. Whereas this, it was really the collaboration between Philip, myself, Mark, and Nathaniel. And when you have, for example, there's, I think, an 18-minute sequence in episode 7 where there's no dialogue. It's just music and effects. Or episode 8, where there's it's a montage, but it's not a montage because it kind of explains what's happened over the previous 8 episodes. And there's 6.5 minutes of just piano and cello and melodies soaring and coming up and down. It's just such a unique experience. So I use that phrase unique, but there's no other way to describe it because this just doesn't happen. To get a chance to collaborate for 2.5 months before the pilot is shot. Yeah, it's like normally you've got 2 weeks on a TV pilot. That's it. Don't see it, do it, right, off you go. So it was just a glorious chance to really get into music and to get into the art form.
Yeah, I can imagine. And it's no surprise you got emotional by the end of it after 2.5 months of just like solidly collaborating with those 2 people. Yeah,
I mean that was at the end of 8 months. The 2.5 months was for the first episode. But yeah, it was. I guess this was my holiday. I got 8 months working with these fantastic people. And the cinematographers that they had, Jeff Cronenworth, did Fight Club, everything, but all the people that they got in all aspects of it, and the actors were phenomenal. Just everything about it, I don't know, it just molded. And the thing is, it's not going to be for everybody, Tales from the Loop, because it is slow. People, when they tune into sci-fi, expect it to be lots of, I don't know, lasers going off and lots of over-the-top VFX and so on. But the sci-fi in this show, it's not really about that. It's about the interconnectivity of humans and how one human touches another. And it just so happens that there's sci-fi enabling all these things. There's this thing under town, this Mercer Institute, where just strange things happen because of this loop, this eclipse that's going on under the town. But you never really find out why it happens or why it's doing that stuff. It's more about what happens between the humans because of the things that are going on. That's an awful description. That's why I'm not a writer that goes into these places and pitches scripts.
Well, I mean, Stalin Haig's style was always subtlety. He would always want those things to look like they were already there. He's not trying to highlight that there's a sci-fi thing there. He's basically like, this was always here. That's kind of the way he works. Yeah,
it just is. There's robots in this series. And one of the, for people that don't know Tales from the Loop, there are robots in this series. And in one of our first attempts at writing music for it, we were just looking at the book and wrote some stuff, as I say, Philip and I. And Mark comes back and says, well, I mean, that's great, but why is it so dark? And it's like, because it's a robot. It's like, yeah, but it's not Terminator. It just is. It's just a robot standing in the field. Go and look at some of the other images. And sure enough, you look at them. And you're saying about Simon's artwork being very subtle. He did one, I think it was recently he did it. It's always so hard to tell. But there was an H&M advertisement in the middle of a field. So you've got this beautiful, huge fields, his usual kind of weird post-apocalyptic buildings everywhere. And then a little H&M picture in the middle of it. And it went viral because everyone thought that he'd been commissioned to do an H&M ad. And he was like, no, I just found it very bizarre, the thought of one little advertising billboard being in this huge field. But I love that. You're not quite sure what's real and what's not.
Yeah, well, that was always the idea. And I guess the TV show has followed the same kind of pattern.
Yeah. And again, a lot of people have said it's like a beautiful Black Mirror in the sense that you're not quite sure what's true and what's not anymore. It does become this thing sci-fi now, doesn't it? It's so futuristic. It's like, yeah, but you can actually do that these days. It's just people wouldn't believe it. So it's not on the market yet.
Yeah, it's getting harder and harder to do sci-fi, isn't it? The more we progress.
And not just sci-fi, fiction in general. Yeah, every day there's something in the news you think, that's made up. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Especially in the world today, hey?
Yes. Anyway, this is a non-politics broadcast. Beep.
Of course, yes. So that's Tales from the Loop, but you've also been working on the mini-series The Nest.
Yes.
Which is a completely different vibe and format, really, isn't it?
So The Nest, I was speaking to Simon, the producer of it, the other day, and he said apparently it's the BBC's most watched new drama of the year. Now,
oh, fantastic!
So which is phenomenal. It's got however many tens of millions of people have watched it, but it had no fanfare whatsoever because they were all due to do the press in the same way. In fact, like Tales from the Loop, they were supposed to be going off and doing a load of press for it the week that the coronavirus hit. So they had the press, literally it was on the Thursday night. I remember this so well because the Thursday night they were having a press screening in London.
Oh, right. Okay.
Thursday night, we were getting everything ready here in my studio to record the quartet for one of the other episodes. And they were going, oh yeah. And Simon just sent me a text saying, it's not looking good. I think we're going to call off the screening. And then at 10:30 that night, we got a call from our players saying, hey, we can't come up. Lockdown is happening in California now.
Wow.
So all of these things are going on at the same time. And then Tales from the Loop, I was getting a text that same night from Nathaniel because there was supposed to be a thing in LA and New York for the kind of showing of it. What's they called it? Tastemakers. I hate that phrase, but where they go along and have wine and cheese, darling, and go and watch it. So, yeah, so Simon said, well, look, so the Nest viewings aren't happening. How are you going to do the score? So, well, I guess we can do it remotely. And I've told this story before, but in short, basically that night, we ended up all night, put out a tweet to players just going, hey, is there anybody in this world? And because we're supposed to be recording on the Friday morning at 9:00. So we ended up then recording players individually in their houses. So there was one in London, there was one in, I think, Berlin, one in New York, one in Glasgow.
Wow.
It was something like that, or one in LA. I can't remember, but it was a quartet anyway. And then, so ended up kind of recording that, literally getting these players overnight on Twitter. Everyone was going, hey, you should speak to Blur, or you should speak to Blur. It's like, right, have you got a setup in your own studio, in your own house? So then we got all the parts back and we're chopping them all up, send them off to my mixer who's on the other side of LA, but of course everyone's in lockdown. So then that's all on FTP, sending it over to him. He's sending me mixes back, which, to be honest, listening to mixes remotely is not much fun, but needs...
Oh no, not at all.
It's quite dull, isn't it? But again, needs must, because normally you're there by the mixing desk going, all right, can we just try the fader 2 dB up on the violin, or take the piano down here, or whatever.
Yeah.
Whereas remotely, you're listening to it and then typing in an email going, hey, can you do me another stereo mix with this down?
Yeah, like loads of bullet points, just like... Boof, boof, boof,
oh,
boof,
yeah, and it's a killer, and it's so depressing. Whereas now, there's a great plugin that's really come of age over the last kind of 2-3 months, where it's all just live. I mean, we always did that anyway with Source Connect, but this way's brilliant because you're just listening in the whole time, and you're just on FaceTime or Skyping or whatever while you're listening through your speakers in the studio. And then instead of actually just emailing, you're chatting away online. Anyway, long-winded story, but basically, so we managed to get it recorded. That was crazy because it was literally then went from him to the dubbing suite in Glasgow on the Saturday. He was then mixing on the Saturday, and that was then went out on air on the Sunday night. So yay, beat that coronavirus. So meanwhile, none of the press have really got wind of any of this. They're just like, well, yeah, oh look, there's another show on the BBC. It's called The Nest. But I think because everyone was then in lockdown, episode 1 did all right. It got something like, God, I can't remember, however many, say it was 1 viewer on the Sunday night. The following week, because everyone was then on lockdown in the UK as well, I think just word of mouth got out. It's like, hey, you should check this out. Hey, you should check this out. And episode 2 suddenly went up, and it went up an awful lot, which doesn't happen. Normally, you get everyone for episode 1 and then episode 2.
Yeah, then it just kind of drops off after that.
Yeah. So episode 2 came out and it suddenly got really good figures and reviews. Suddenly it's on iPlayers going mental, and there are loads of people watching it on catch up. Until by the time you get to episode 5, which was the last one, BBC were like, wow, this is unheard of. And it was, really hit the kind of the ages. They aim for all these age categories when they write stuff, which I find weird. I just think if you write good drama, people will watch it. But I know that they did really well in the kind of 20 to 40-year-olds, which is a really good market for them. But yeah, so now it's had however many tens of millions watching it. The thing is, if so many people kind of say, well, we'll watch it in 2-3 months because there's so much content out at the moment, then I don't know how people will work out whether things get second series or not. And the Nest is different because it's self-contained anyway. But just as a general aside, I don't know how they work it out because these are such weird times that do they take that into account or not? I don't know. But anyway, so that was how the Nest it did so well. I think it was literally word of mouth because you had nothing else to do for that first week except for, I don't know, pee fitness with Joe Wicks or watch The Nest. I'm going to watch The Nest. Thank you.
So what was it like working on that straight up? Was it straight after Tales from the Loop, or was it while you were working on something else? And do you just have to kind of shift gears and just kind of go, right, okay, I'm in this mindset now?
When was that? I'm just trying to think. So Tales from the Loop finished, I think they overlapped. Tales from the Loop was finishing mid-December. And then I was working on Cyberpunk because I flew over to Poland in December. Yeah. And then I'd started, that's right. And then I'd spotted the first episode of Nest just before I flew over to Poland. And then I wrote some themes over Christmas, flew to London in January, was chatting with Simon and Nicole, the wonderful writer. She had written Three Girls, which just amazing. So I went over to her house with Simon and Andy, the director, and it's quite strange. Again, it's like doing initial themes, whether it's for a film or a series or whatever. It's a lot harder if you haven't met the person. And FaceTime is fantastic and Skype is fantastic, but there's still...
It's not the same though, is it?
It's not the same as going out and having, whether it's a coffee or a pint or whatever, because you've got to get on that person's wavelength. In the same way that I was saying about collaborating with Philip earlier on. Every single thing that you do is a collaboration of sorts, and you've got to find out the mutual language. So when someone says, I want it classical, do they mean classical, or by classical, do they just mean I want some real instruments on it, but I can do something bolder? So it takes a while to kind of get that chat going. So Nicole had just had a baby. I was sat on her floor while she was with the baby. Simon was there, Andy was there, and we were just talking about my ideas, and we started talking about using voice, which I thought was a really interesting idea because we're talking about again, for those that haven't seen The Nest, it's about surrogacy. And there was a whole thing of, Nicole had used this phrase, a folie à trois, which they don't know why, but these two people that have gone to this third person to have a baby, there's something just calling them together. So every time you had that calling together, it's like, let's use vocals, and not in an angelic kind of way, but in a really subtle way.
I was going to say.
Yes. But again, it goes back to my use of the motifs and the use of thematic material and just different ways of doing it, so that subliminally you hear this voice go, wow, there's something that's making you feel a certain way. And the use of that voice, I use electric cello on The Nest a lot. So you're not quite sure, to begin with, it's a classical kind of vibe, but then the cello, when she starts getting all twisted and losing her mind a little bit, that's when I started putting the cello through a load of effects, and suddenly you got some really crunched up, distorted cello on it.
Nice.
And I like that when, the soundtrack just morphs from one thing to another. So yeah, it was very different from the loop, but it's different in the sense that there's a lot of electronica on there with a quartet adding to it rather than just a quartet being by itself. The hard thing for me isn't about taking tunes from one project to the next. There's the fear that, oh my goodness, have I just used that on, have I used that on Cyberpunk, or have I used that on the loop, or who have I stolen this idea from? Oh, it's mine, that's fine. Yeah, but which project? That isn't the worry for me. The concern is more keeping that musical language and the musical color unique to a show. So you're not just, it's very easy to rely on a trick where you go, oh, that's a good sound, I could just use that in this one because it's good just to add a bit of atmos. I like keeping sound specific to a show. I think otherwise you can get quite lazy with it. But it's a damn sight easier if you just go, oh, I know how to make that cue sound good, I could just put this underneath it. No, challenge yourself, try something different. It's like muscle memory when you play the piano or guitar or whatever. Your hands naturally go to the chords that you always play. So I can't remember who it was, but it might be Malcolm Gladwell, but he said it takes something like 100 times sitting at a piano and playing 100 different tunes until you've reached even something vaguely original, because of all the music that you hear, whether it's on the radio or in town or... Yeah,
it's all influencing you.
Yeah. So you've just got to do 100 times before you even get to something, just to get all of those tunes out of your head. It's like, I haven't got time to write something 100 times. I've got 5 days to write an episode.
Well, I think it's like, it's kind of how the process works. Like, you start off when you're learning and you learn all these things and you learn how they work and why they work. So you start using them more because you learn about their kind of feature, if you know what I mean. And then you get to the point where you're technically good at what you do. And then you have to change things up because you've got into these habits of, like, you've learned the scales. So you know that this works in this key or that, all these different things. And then you have to be like, right, okay, now I've just kind of slipped into doing this all the time. I need to change things up. And then actually come up with original new stuff all the time. And that's kind of part of the way you grow, I think, as a creative.
Sure, that's a really good analogy. I'd never really thought about it like that, from the scales to developing. So I can't play jazz, right? Jazz confuses me.
Can anyone really play jazz? That's like a big question.
Any jazz is like, but the right hand doing all of those scales, I'm technically good, but I'm not technically brilliant. And the ability to go between all the different kind of scales in jazz is just phenomenal. Maximum respect for that. But as far as pushing yourself in a different direction, I go back to Errol's film Wormwood. Everybody got to know me. So when I studied at the Royal Scottish Academy of Music, I was writing my clarinet concertos, I was doing all my orchestral stuff. And then I got known as the electronic guy. I've been producing bands, doing string arrangements for them and so on, doing tons of that in Glasgow. But then I did Limitless, and then I did Dredd, and I did a game called Battlefield Hardline, and everyone suddenly knew me as like the hardcore electronica. And it was a time, I think The Social Network had just won the Oscar as well. So everyone was looking for that kind of electronic vibe. It's like, oh, there's Paul, he's good at that. It's like, well, I am, but I also work with my big orchestras. And I think the strange thing was getting to work on Wormwood and the B-side with Errol. Errol is such a renowned director, as I say, Academy Award winner, that you then get this kudos and respect from people like, oh, Errol's listening to him, Errol's using him. Oh, let's listen to his stuff. Oh, wow, that's beautiful. And it's not that you don't have it in you, it's just that you haven't had a chance to experiment with that side of it. So suddenly when people go, okay, well, he works beautifully with a quartet and piano and cello and some weird and wacky stuff. It's a slight hybrid kind of stuff. Then you get given a chance to then experiment because they're like, oh, we like Wormwood. It's like, oh, well, that's great, but you're not going to get Wormwood because I've already scored that, but I can start going into that side of me. So I guess it's been given that chance to experiment, isn't it?
Yeah. And I think, I'm kind of curious whether you get that itch to scratch where you've kind of been hired for writing similar-ish styles, or, a certain thing hasn't come up in a while. And then you're like, do you know what? I really fancy working on something where I can do this, or I can explore that.
So I'm working on a movie at the moment. Michael Caine, actually, it's funny. You got to see him coming down. It's like, oh my God, it's Michael Caine.
Amazing.
When you look at it, and they've temped it up, whatever music they chuck in. And I was like, well, I see what you're trying to do with that. But to be honest, I just want to switch it off and do my own thing. And again, it takes a while to get to that confidence in yourself where you just go, instead of trying to imitate anything that they've done as temp, thinking it's gospel, you suddenly realize, well, hang on. If they wanted to do that, they could go to anybody. But the whole point of bringing a composer on board is to bring something unique to their film. To answer your question, it's like, so I'm going down this different path. I was like, oh, this is really cool. I haven't really done anything like this before, but I've just bought a Rhodes 1975 keyboard last year with a full-on kind of amp. So the cabinet. So I love this sound. It's quite a sort of bluesy vibe, but it's also really nice from an indie band kind of vibe. And I started playing it, and I just sat my phone on top of it and FaceTimed the director who was in Toronto. And I was like, well, this is the kind of vibe I'm thinking of, and I love this sound, and I just wanted to play this sound to see what you think of it. So, this is fantastic. I hadn't thought of that. And that's, again, when it gives you a buzz. You're like, haha, I brought something new to their film which they hadn't thought of. But also it's working really nicely, because then that gives you the fun of going into this film then for the next month and a half, getting to experiment and do this stuff.
Yeah, and you're all excited for it, and it gives you something new to challenge yourself.
Yeah, because otherwise, where's the fun in it? You're doing sleepless nights. You're in a studio 20 hours a day. And now with lockdown, you don't even get a producer or a director to come up and give you moral support. so you've got to get this whole interview comes full circle. It's like, you've got to love what it is that you do. And suddenly when that first playback, when they like your stuff, and obviously it's a collaboration, so it's not all going to be right. But your first pass, really what you're striving for is to nail the sound almost. So the way that I do it is I just blitz it in a week. Get to the end, and when you get to the end of the first pass, you go and sleep. But by the end of it, you've got these really good sounds. So even though you think at the beginning of the film you're doing pretty well, then by the end of it, you're like, okay, now I've got all these tunes and these sounds. Now I need to go back to the beginning and go and redo probably the first 3 reels, because now I know what I'm doing with it. But yeah, it's that adrenaline buzz that keeps you up all night, that gets you going, that gets that creativity going. And that's what I guess for me as a composer I live for. It's just that buzz, whether it's someone loving your stuff as a collaborator, or suddenly getting into a 5-minute cue on a film, or suddenly seeing your music attached to the game or whatever. It's those buzzes that you've got to enjoy it. Yeah,
definitely. Especially when you're saying you're doing 20-hour days.
That's pretty normal for a soundtrack. For the last kind of 2 or 3 weeks for a soundtrack, you tend to do about 20-hour days and then just fall asleep at the end of it.
Wow, that's crazy. And do you think it'll always be that way? Is it just in sheer amounts of workload?
It depends. Some films, when there's no massive rush for it, and they tend to be the smaller indie ones, it's not so bad because you're just kind of doing it for the love of it almost. But the bigger kind of tentpole movies or the TV stuff, you have proper deadlines, and those deadlines have got to be met. And if you think about it, music and effects are the last things to be put on a film. So they're still reshooting, or they're still re-editing. We need to save this film, or we're in a really good place. We need to make it better. We're going to tweak. Or we need to shoot. Yeah. Limitless had a new ending. I remember that. And they had a new ending, and they said, right, and I'd scored the whole film in about 2.5 weeks anyway. It was bonkers. It was over Christmas. And then they said, all right, well, we got a new ending, and we're shooting at the moment, and we need you to score it. And I was like, well, that's fine. And it was something like, they were sending it on the Thursday. I was going to get it on the Thursday night. I had overnight on Thursday night to score it. And then on the Friday, I flew down from Glasgow to London to record at Air on the Friday night. It was literally 24 hours. I had to score this thing.
Wow.
Then they send it back by FTP, the mixers, probably early on the Saturday morning. And then they're literally in the dub there and then. So all of these things with a film, it's completely last minute, because the shoot is the most important part, then it's the edit, and then all that's left that they can do to their film is the music and effects. So if they're using up all the extra days before release date with shooting or editing, my deadline isn't changing. They've still got the same release date. So you just get less and less time. So I mean, it's all hands on deck for those last kind of few weeks where you've got your assistants or you've got your music editors or whoever it is, just everybody's just going hell for leather. But it's that, what we spoke about earlier on, it's that camaraderie, it's that feeling of teamwork, which is really cool. Because by the end of it, say you sleep and then just go, oh, that was a really good buzz. I like that.
Well, when you get to the pure exhaustion state, I can imagine the sleep feels very good.
Yeah, but do you know what? The thing that I always dream of as a composer is mixing. They shut Angel Studios at the end of last year, which is very sad in London. But Angel and Air were, when I'm in London, that's where I record. In LA, it tends to be kind of capital, I love. And the Eastwood scoring stage. But you dream of finishing recording, you're so fried, and all you want to do is just curl up in a pub, in a corner, with a pint. And it's not like 5,000 pints. Like, when I'm composing, I don't really drink because you need your head space and you haven't got time anyway. But I like just having a drink at the end of it. But the git is, on the last day of a mix, you've always run over and it's always 3:00 in the morning and then all the pubs are shut anyway. So
yeah, exactly. You just say, oh, well, I guess I'll just...
Yeah, it's like, oh, well, next soundtrack.
Okay, so sadly, I have one question left.
Sadly, because there's one question left, or sadly because you've only got one question left?
Sadly, because there's only one left, and that means that's the end of the podcast episode, which is always a shame. So, okay, my final question for you is, what are you working on at the moment that you can tell us about?
That I can tell you about? Well, I can tell you that I'm working on Cyberpunk, as you know. But that's all I can tell you. But we're nearly done with it, and it's phenomenal. That's all I give you for now. But I'll speak to you in 3 months or something like that, and we'll talk about it in detail. I'm working on this Michael Caine film called Bestsellers, and Aubrey Plaza and Michael Caine, which is a beautiful film. I've just literally last night finished a film called Conversion, which had Zachary Quinto narrating it. So that was pretty cool. I've got a film starting up. It's supposed to be this week, but it's going to be in 2 weeks because I've got to finish off this other thing first, which is a great film I'm really looking forward to, with Nathaniel Kahn, who was an Oscar nominee for Architect. And it's great. It'll be about 2 months, but it's about NASA and discovering, is there life on other planets? It's a feature doc, but it's just this wonderful, wonderful thing. And it's about women in science and women in NASA, and just about how there are more and more coming through, and why the hell haven't there been more before? And then if we look at the kind of the space and the telescopes and the satellites and so on, and the building of the James Watt telescope, which is this however many billions it's cost, which is being built over here, which is going to see, it's the most powerful telescope history of mankind.
Yeah, I think I heard about it a while ago.
Yeah, it's wicked. So there's that. Errol's got a new film. He phoned up last week and said that it's for Showtime. It's on the life of Tim Leary, father of LSD. So, what is it with Errol and his acid films? So I think I need to start that one in July. And there's a Netflix series that I'm starting in the UK. So yeah, it's a pretty busy year, which is very surreal, because you kind of go into lockdown and kind of think, oh, well, nothing's in production. But in actual fact, there is still a lot that's either been shot or that are documentaries, and particularly on kind of feature docs, they've been shot over the last 2 years, and it takes however long to actually edit them up.
Oh, so they have all the footage already. Yeah.
Yeah. So all of those things, and and obviously games carry on as is. So I think games and animation is going to be the way forward for the next few years.
Yeah, I think it's definitely one of the fortunate industries, I have to say, that hasn't been too badly affected by this current situation.
Hopefully everyone will get back soon. I have no idea how it works. My mate's a director, and he was saying there's talk of them getting back into directing in August. And he's like, I don't know.
Yeah, it's just that time right now, isn't it?
Well, genuinely, if you think about shooting intimate scenes or anything, just the logic behind it now and how they're actually going to do it. I don't know if it's going to be tons of CGI or what. I mean, my job as a composer afterwards is to do whatever anyway. But I feel for those guys so much, as I do for everyone. But how the logistics of it is just... it's mind-boggling. Anyway, not my job, above my pay grade.
Well, good luck with all those projects that are coming out, and it looks like we'll be chatting again soon after Cyberpunk comes out.
I look forward to it, Sam.
Excellent. Thanks again, Paul, and take care.
Cheers, man. Bye.
Hey, everyone. This is Sam. Thanks very much for listening to the Sound Architect podcast today. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If so, there are many ways you can support the show, which is incredibly appreciated. Obviously, there's the financial way where you can support us on Patreon, which is patreon.com/sounddesignuk. However, there are many other ways which also help, such as liking, subscribing, reviewing, commenting, and sharing via whatever channel you listen on. Thanks so much for your support already. It really is a work of passion for me, and I'd love to keep sharing the knowledge from all these talented and wonderful people. Catch you on the next episode.